Hello and welcome to this transmitter programming tutorial. Today we'll be programming this DX6E for the UMX Voodoo by E-Flite. This is pretty simple programming that can be applicable to the UMX A10 by E-Flite and the UMX pits as well. We're using a DX6E, but this programming will work for any DX radio. Let's start by selecting our model. Scroll all the way down to the System Setup menu and click. You'll see a warning letting you know that by going into this menu, it shuts off the RF deck, meaning there'll be no signal being transmitted from the transmitter. All right, we see the light went off, indicating that the signal is shut off. Now we can scroll down to Model Select and to Add New Model. And now we have a blank, completely new model on the transmitter. Now we can name the model by scrolling down to Model Name. Start with the first character, change it, and then name it accordingly what you'd like. Once the name is entered, push the back button again, and once again to go back to the main menu. Now we can set up the dual rates per the manual. Click the scroll wheel and scroll down to DR and Expo. Click again. Now we can see it's already set to the aileron channel. We just need to set a switch to control our dual rates. I'll be using the C switch. So I'll scroll down to Switch, click, and scroll to the right to switch C. Now the 0 position of the switch is going to be our high rates, so we'll leave those at 100%. That'll give us full deflection of the aircraft surfaces and keep the plane's response snappy and quick. The manual does suggest a 10% expo. Now we'll flip the switch down to the 1 position and we'll bring our rates down to 70%. And also the expo up to 10%. We can verify it's working. When we flip back to position 0, we see we have our high rates, 100%. We flip back to 1, we have our low rates, 70%. Now let's go to the elevator and rudder channels and do the same. Click on the channel aileron, scroll to the right to find elevator. We'll scroll down to the switch and choose switch C. Set expo to 10%. Now let's flip the C switch to the 1 position. And now change those rates to 70%. And add 10% expo. And now we can do the same for our rudder channel. Now we have our high and low rates and our exponential set up to a dual rate switch. With the position in high rates, we'll have full deflection of the aircraft's surfaces, keeping the aircraft's movements very quick and snappy. Flipping the dual rate switch down to the low position reduces the amount of travel that our surfaces on the aircraft have, making the aircraft a little more manageable to fly. Now that our dual rates are set, push the back button. And now let's set up our throttle cut. Scroll to throttle cut and click. And then click on inhibit. All we have to do to set up our throttle cut is select a switch. The H switch is the most commonly used throttle cut switch, and that's the switch I'll be using. When we select the switch position is already set to negative 100%, exactly what we want. When the throttle cut switch is on, if we bump the throttle stick, the throttle channel will not move. With throttle cut off, we see we have full control over our throttle channel by moving the throttle stick. Throttle cut is extremely important as it can eliminate the risk of accidentally throttling up a motor. Push the back button, and now let's check the timer. We can see on this radio with a blank model, the timer is already set at 5 minutes, exactly where we want it for this aircraft. When the throttle stick is raised, the timer will begin to count down. After 5 minutes is up, the transmitter will let out an audible tone, letting you know it's time to land. Thank you for joining me in this tutorial. Hello and welcome to this transmitter programming tutorial for the E-Flite UMX Voodoo. This is fairly basic programming that's used in multiple other aircraft, such as the UMX A10 and the UMX pits. Let's get started by selecting a model. Click the scroll wheel and scroll down to System Setup. Here we'll get a little warning screen letting us know that by continuing to this menu, it'll shut off our RF deck, meaning that there will be no signal being sent out from our transmitter. Click Yes, and scroll down to Model Select. Let's scroll down to Add New Model, and down to Create. All right, now we can scroll down to Model Name to name our model. We'll just start with the first character. And once we have the name entered, push the back button. Push the back button once again to take us back to the main menu. And now we can set up our dual rates and exponential. Click the scroll wheel and scroll down to DR and Expo. The manual recommends setting a high rate of 100% and a low rate of 70% with 10% Expo. We can see the channel aileron is already selected, but we need to go down to Switch and select a switch to control our dual rates. I'll be using the C switch. So scroll down to where it says Switch On, and click, and scroll over to Switch C. With Switch C in the 0 position, that will be our high rate. So we will leave the rates at 100%. But we will add 10% Expo. Now flip the C switch to the 1 position. We can go ahead and add that 10% Expo as well. And go to rates and bring that down to 70%. And click to lock it in. And now we can test that functionality by flipping back to 0. And we can see it changes as it should, to 100% for high rates and 70% for low. Now let's do the same procedure for the elevator and rudder channels. Scroll up to Channel, click on Aileron, and scroll to the right 1 click to Elevator. Go ahead and go down to Switch, select Switch C, and to Expo to add 10% Expo. Now flip Switch C down to the 1 position. Go ahead and add that 10% Expo and bring the rate down to 70. Now we'll do the exact same procedure on the rudder channel. And there we have our dual rates and expo set up. With your dual rate switch in the high position, that will give full throw over your aircraft surfaces, keeping the aircraft responsive and snappy. Flip the dual rate switch down to the 1 position, and that's our low rates. Low rates decrease the amount of deflection on the airplane's surfaces, allowing it to fly a little more docile and controllable. Push the back button to take us back to the function list, and now scroll to throttle cut. Scroll down to where it says Switch Inhibit, and choose a switch. The H switch is most commonly used for throttle cut, and that's the switch that I'll be using. Just by selecting a switch, the position is automatically set to -100%, exactly where we want it. So long as the throttle cut is on, when we bump the throttle stick, the throttle channel does not move past -100%. When we flip throttle cut off, we can see we now have full control over the throttle channel with the throttle stick. Throttle cut is very important as it can eliminate the risk of an unintentional motor spool up. All right, we'll push the back button to the function list again. And now let's check the timer. Scroll down to timer, and we can see with a new blank model, the timer is already set to 5 minutes. And that's exactly what the manual calls for. When we lift up the throttle stick and begin our flight, the timer will start counting down. When the 5-minute timer has run down, an audible tone will be emitted, letting you know it's time to land. Thank you for joining me in this transmitter tutorial. Hello and welcome to this transmitter programming tutorial for the E-Flite UMX Voodoo. This is a relatively simple programming that can be utilized for several different aircraft, such as the UMX A10 Warthog and the UMX Pitts. I am using an IX-14 for this video, but this programming is applicable for all IX radios. We'll get started by selecting a brand new model. Click the icon of the marker at the top left-hand side of the screen, and then click Proceed. Click the 3 dots at the top right-hand side of the screen, then select Add New Model. Select Default and Airplane. Create. Now our brand new blank model is selected. It'll show up at the bottom of the list. Let's click on it. Here we can name the model. Click where it says Acro. Easy as that. Now we'll push the back button, taking us back to the main menu. Now we can set up our dual rates and exponential. Click on Model Adjust, and then click on Dual Rates and Expo. We can see the channel is already selected as aileron. Let's go ahead and choose a switch to be our dual rate switch. I'll be using the C switch. So click where it says On, and choose the C switch. Now the C switch in the 0 position, that will be our high rate. So we want to leave that at 100%. But we do need to add 10% expo per the manual. Now when we flip the high rate switch down to the low rate position, position 1, we can see the expo changed. So we need to go ahead and add another 10% expo to that. And we can go to the rates and bring them down to 70%. Now we see when we flip the switch back to high rates, we get 100% full rates. And on both positions, we have 10% expo. So that is working properly. Now let's do the same for our elevator and rudder channels. Click where it says aileron, change to elevator. And now click where it says switch on, change that to switch C. And add 10% expo. and then flip the switch down to position 1, and there we'll set our low rates. Again, we'll bring expo back to 10% and bring the rates down to 70. We can see that's functioning as it should. And now we'll do the exact same thing for the rudder channel. And that's it. Our dual rates and exponential is set up. Keeping the high rate switch in the 0 position, or the high rate position, allows our aircraft surfaces to have full deflection, keeping the aircraft very responsive and snappy. Flip the switch down to the 1 position, and that's our low rates. This decreases the deflection of the aircraft surfaces, making it a little more docile and more manageable to fly. Now that those are set up, push the back button, and now we'll set up our throttle cut. Click on where it says throttle cut, and then where it says switch inhibit, click on inhibit, and we'll choose a switch. The H switch is most commonly used for throttle cut. When the throttle cut is on, the throttle channel does not move when we move the throttle stick. When we turn the throttle cut off, we see that the throttle does respond to our throttle stick. Throttle cut is very important when out at the field to help reduce the chance of an accidental motor spool up. Now we'll push the back button twice to go back to our main menu. Here's our timer. If we push and hold, it'll reset. And we can see on a new model, the timer is already set to 5 minutes. Exactly what our manual calls for. When you raise the throttle stick to fly, the timer begins. After 5 minutes, an audible tone will be emitted, letting you know it's time to land. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial.